I'm Jeff Parisse. I'm the Senior Aviation Analyst for RAS Security Group in Redondo Beach. I'm also the Technology Director for the CUAS Coalition in Washington, D.C. that Rob just spoke about. RAS is a private security firm in California. Our clients include stadiums, movie companies, tech startups, casinos, hotels, and we are also the security arm for the largest cannabis company in the United States. And after the IPO, will be the largest cannabis company in the world. Today, joining me in the back are Nadine Anderson, our Director of Sales, and Ryan Schofeld, our CEO. I always find it fascinating to learn how people got into this crazy business. And we've heard a couple tales already. I'll basically go over a few minutes of how I got into this business. I ran a special effects company in Hollywood for 20 years. My company's specialty were electrical arcs and sparks. And I enjoyed that business very much. We did movies, television, a lot of stage shows. We did the Broadway production of Young Frankenstein. But after 2001, there was a downturn in business in entertainment that we experienced. And I decided, rather than having the guys clean the shop floor for the millionth time, that we would start on a special project program. And the special project program was really intended to keep the minds of my employees fresh and their hands nimble. And one of the things that we started to do was fly electric model aircraft outfitted with down-pointing digital cameras. At that point, there were no autopilots available, and this is about 2002. So what we would do is use other methods for getting the airplane to come back to us, either a dethermalizer or a rudder on a timer or limited motor runs. And almost always we got these cameras back, and it was fascinating. We did this for years. At about 2005, a major university approached us, having seen some of our work that we were posting on the internet, and asked us to create a model aircraft or a drone that would collect pollen at a particular altitude. It seems that pollen was measured either from the ground or via aircraft, and the most scientifically significant area of airspace was that area in between. And it was later determined that a bulk of, in this case it was corn pollen flies in this area. So this model airplane had Petri dishes on a servo. It would fly to location, open and close the Petri dishes, and that's how this university was able to conclude their studies. Because we were in the entertainment business and because we were a special effects company, we knew a lot of people in cinematography and photography, and so it was only natural as our work in sUAS progressed to go into photography. But I could see that there was going to be a groundswell of participation by people that wanted to do aerial photography, having been so fascinated by the view myself. And I knew that it was only a short matter of time before there were going to be too many vendors, too many participants strewn across the hobby, semi-pro, professional arenas, and I didn't want to involve my team with that. So we started to look into carrying other sensors, specifically NIR sensors, doing crop agronomy, and all for fun. This was something I was doing with my employees to keep us busy during the downtime. In 2013, I sold my special effects company to a guy that moved it to Texas. He's doing quite well with it. And I came to the very first sUAS Expo over at the Presidio, and I met my future employer, Eileen Shibley. Eileen Shibley was the Unmanned Systems Division Head for NavAir at the China Lake Naval Weapons Station. The China Lake Naval Weapons Station is the largest Navy base in the United States, and it also happens to be located in the middle of the desert. While working at China Lake Eileen brought me in for the CUAS program. CUAS was one of two FAA test site entrants from California. California was not chosen to be the site of any FAA test sites, And so Eileen quickly transitioned to a for-profit organization and formed a company called Monarch. I worked at Monarch for several years doing NIR crop research. We also worked with SunPower doing solar array inspections, wind power inspections. It was a fascinating time to be in research and develop in the drone business. I'd like to share with you some turn-of-the-century equipment that we used to use, and we'll start with the first one, which is the FMA Copilot. This is a device that came out in 2013 and had 4 thermopiles, which are little windows that would see either the coldness of the sky or the heat of the earth, and then form an artificial horizon. This was meant for the hobby community, for people that were new to learning how to fly, that would stabilize their airplane. But it gave people like myself, who were developing navigational electronics, a stable platform on which to build. I believe this was one of the most significant advancements in the hobby industry that really spurred the low-end drone community and the sUAS community from there. In 2004, a device called the Pico Pilot became available in the market. The Pico Pilot was the first sub-$1,000 autopilot available. There were other companies, CloudCap and Micropilot, but their systems were extremely expensive and quite an endeavor to become involved with. With the Pico Pilot, a user hand enters GPS coordinates, launches the plane, engages the autopilot would follow a route and then come back, and when it was loitering, you would disengage the autopilot and then land the plane manually. It was this autopilot that we used for the university project. Next up is the Waypoint Sequencer. This was a very significant project that was promulgated on RC groups at the UAV forum by a bunch of enthusiasts, particularly one man whose name was MX. I don't know his real name, but he headed a project where we created basically a Pico Pilot clone, a Waypoint navigator, something that would turn a rudder ailerons to a new GPS coordinate. And this lowered the price point for autopilotry from around $1,000 to about $15. So it was very, very significant and allowed a lot of people to get into autopilotry in the fixed wing arena. Well, it wasn't until later, 2006, 2007, that multi-rotors came about, most notably in Germany with the Microcopter project. Here in the US, several hobbyists, again, how many remember the Nintendo Wii game? Okay, a couple people. The Nintendo Wii game was revolutionary because it had handheld components called nunchucks. And as you move these nunchucks around, there were sensors that would determine your hand position and feed that back to the game. Well, the sensor that was inside that nunchuck was basic IMU, an inertial measurement unit. And it allowed people that would buy an old Wii, you'd bust open the nunchuck and you'd pull out the chip that serves as the IMU, and then you would hook it up to a educational computer called an Arduino. This is an Arduino. Arduino is an Italian company that came up with a board for teaching electronics to students. And so anybody today who learns electronics on this device right here, the Arduino. Well, it became obvious that once you had the nunchuck sensor hooked up to the Arduino and to a couple motors and propellers, that you were able to make a drone. And the reason the Multi-Wii project was significant, at least to me, is because it was the first time that drone science entered into an enormous user base of people that had electronic knowledge that could code, write, and create drones of their own. Honorable mention goes to the GAWI 330X. The GAWI 330X, I show the brain right there. All this stuff came out of my drawer at home. I was going to hold up each little piece, but my wife begged me to make a graphic for it. The GAWI 330X deserves special mention because it was the first store-bought copter or store-bought drone. And a lot of people who were working with Multi-Wii to write code would buy the GAWI SX to practice and learn how to fly. All right, now I'd like to get into the bulk of my talk. about security in the drone space and how security drone vendors can better dialogue with security people, and security people can get the most out of drone vendors. It's a difficult time to be in both businesses because the security companies are getting demand for clients, yet, as we've seen from previous speakers, the laws and mechanics revolving around CUAS are still infantile. I'm a R&D specialist. I'm used to new. I've been working with security for only 2 months, so the security industry is very new to me. However, I'm comfortable in that role because that's what R&D people do. We walk into new situations, look at old problems to understand them and seek improvement, if any. I've also noticed in my time in entertainment and in security, there's certain similarities. One of the similarities is nomenclature. When I was doing risk mitigation and analysis for special effects, and we did some of the most dangerous special effects on planet Earth at KVA effects, all dealing with 1,000,000-volt lightning bolts that would kill a person easily. So we worked with event, probability, and severity. What was the event that could happen? What was the chance that it might happen? And if it did happen, what would be the outcome? Well, I've since learned, working in security, that there is a triad called threat, vulnerability, and consequences. It's basically the same thing. What is the threat? What vulnerabilities do we have to that threat? And should it come to fruition, what would be the consequences of that? So the operational security is common between entertainment and the security business providing operational security to clients. From purchasing a script, to rewriting a script, to table reads, to turning that script into a screenplay, to rehearsals, to on-set. Those are all avenues in which very expensive IP can leak out and ruin a movie premiere. So the concept of operational security in my past business is very congruous with the concept of operational security in the security industry. I live in the Hawthorne Aerospace Corridor. For those of you not familiar with the Hawthorne Aerospace Corridor, literally across the street from my house is Parsons, Global Sciences, Martin Marietta. Catty corner is the Los Angeles Air Force Base. Across the other street is Aerospace Corp, home of the GPS and where our GPS satellites are driven. And beyond them is Raytheon Corp, their space division. And down the street a bit is SpaceX, where they actually build the Falcon and Falcon Heavy rockets. So I had the opportunity to discuss the specter and concept of industrial espionage in Southern California with some people who are directly involved with industrial espionage in Southern California. And I asked several people, neighbors of mine, what did their firms do to combat or mitigate IP theft? And the answers were, of course, varied. These were very different organizations, although in the same industry. But there was a common thread. And the common thread was divisions or work groups are broken down into smaller units and separated. That is, a work group would be physically moved to a new location and cut off from the company's intranet. And so that you would have several work groups working on a single project, but do not communicate with one another. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to counter a problem, but it seems a real lousy way to do business. But what it tells us about our security partners, well, I'll ask you, what's the best way to keep a secret? Anybody? Don't tell anybody, exactly. It's almost obvious. The best way to keep a secret is don't tell anybody. But what if it's an organizational secret? What if other people have to know, like your coworkers? All right? One of my first conversations with Ryan when we sat down to talk about the business and how I would possibly fit into it, he relayed a story of a company called Hikvision. Hikvision is a company that provides security cameras by the millions. They're a very popular company. Well, it was recently discovered, either intentionally or not intentionally, that there were security vulnerabilities in Hikvision's products that allowed third parties to be able to access the video streams from all these millions of cameras. These cameras are installed in military installations, private companies, everywhere, all right? So the takeaway I got from my conversation with Ryan is that technology in the pursuit of security can bring on its own problems in security. And the security business in general is very wary of high-tech tools, even in the high-tech security business of IP, cracking and all that Department 13 stuff. Some people had indicated that Hikvision was not an American company, and therein lie the fault. But I ask, is Intel, Google, or Facebook any better? They've been proven, these companies, to be lax stewards of their company's data, perhaps even their own, and also practice what I call industrial espionage via the end user license agreement. How many times have we clicked, I accept, only to find out that we've accepted to send out voice recordings, video, our location, our friends, all this sensitive data about ourselves because we did not read an EULA. Has anybody ever read an end user license agreement front to back? I would expect Terry. Where's Terry? All right, so.
I returned the device.
What I have concluded from these discussions is that very large companies make poor security partners. Is this a difficult time to be in the security business? It certainly is, as Rob pointed out, with the difficulty we have with laws catching up with what we need to do. So what are the security industry's concerns about UAS and sUAS? On the sUAS side, obviously, it's questionable data security. Internet-connected apps, ground stations, a vague chain of custody of data. What are the security industry's concerns about counter-UAS? Well, the number one is jamming. Jamming is the domestic equivalent of chemical warfare, and it's something that cannot be accepted by a modern society under any circumstances. Jamming's a non-starter. Jamming doesn't work. Also, single vendor solutions. We've seen a lot of solutions that go after the market leader. Well, the market leader's not always going to be the problem. As we saw with the McCarran incident, the drone racing community is soon to rise to be the most troubling part of the CUAS equation, right? If you are not familiar, the McCarran Airport is the airport in Las Vegas, and a couple of months ago, a drone freestyle racer got up to altitude of a landing aircraft and did barrel rolls over its rudder as it passed below. Okay? That was not a DJI product. On a positive note, a couple of weeks ago, I went to the International Security Conference, and I saw some positive things that are showing me a trend in the right direction. Number one, companies are responding with open source solutions, such as the Pixhawk 2.1. Open source has a tremendous advantage, which is also its disadvantage. The advantage of open source is that it is open, and if one has the ability to read code, one can read every single line of code in their autopilot and determine what that autopilot's doing and what information it's sending out. That's also the disadvantage of open source, is any bad guy hacker also has all the code that they can read and use to exploit. On the whole, however, I believe that open source software and open source hardware has a lot of promise in the security business because it is open. I also saw companies that are responding with tools to go after the drone operator, not the drone. The goal in security is the arrest or apprehension of the bad guy, not the drone. You can't prosecute a drone. You need a person to prosecute. So we've seen a lot of solutions that are directed at interdicting drones, getting that drone, capturing that drone, downing the drone, understanding the drone, characterizing the drone. That's a large group of people really misunderstanding their client. We're not after the drone, folks. We're after the drone flyer. Two companies that I would like to mention. One was mentioned earlier, Dedrone. Dedrone has some new tools that involve radio direction finding. Radio direction finding of the command and control leads us to the operator, and that's a good thing. Also, there's a company out of Israel called Defend, which is also making mitigation tools that we think would be operationally successful in this legal environment that we find ourselves in. My father is a former executive at IBM and a Sloan Fellow. And whatever I needed business advice, I would go to him. And any entrepreneur in this room knows that your business life is a series of ups and downs, successes, failures, gains, and losses. And in 2008, I had what I consider to be my big loss. When I went to my father for advice or consolement, he said, "Jeff, you have to know your client." At that time, I was frustrated by that advice because I thought it was a platitude. I thought it was an oversimplification. Didn't mean much to me at the time. But I realize now that especially in the security business, especially now, knowing your client, knowing your vendor, is the most important element to success in drone mitigation or using drones for security purposes. So, in conclusion, I would like to offer some advice to security companies considering using drones or, oh my goodness. Well, we'll just leave the last slide off and I'll read the conclusion up. Security companies should consider smaller companies or operational units as security partners for the reasons that we've covered already. Security companies should make sure that their vendors limit equipment and software from unnecessary communication. Not everything has to talk to everybody all the time. I realize we're in a connected world. That's not always an advantage. Also, I would enjoin firms in the security industry to include open source options as you look for vendors in your decision-making process. For drone vendors, there are a few in this room, I would like to remind them that both sides of the security equation is driven by human ingenuity. It's not a box of electronics you're facing, it's somebody running that box of electronics you're facing. Good old-fashioned police work is actually the cornerstone and bedrock of the security business. As fancy as we want to get with our tools, it's good old-fashioned police work that is the cornerstone. Realize that our goal is the apprehension of the operator, not the seizure of their tools, and also that simple, closed communication systems are preferred in this marketplace. So hopefully for drone vendors, I've given you some ideas on how to work better with security companies. Hopefully for security companies, I've given you some better ideas on how to work with drone vendors. I'd like to open it up to questions, and if there are questions specific about security, I'll refer them to my CEO or my head of sales. If there are questions about technology, I'll do my best to field them. Yes?
What's the current thinking on providers that give drone software to their customers that return operational information to that provider's servers?
Exactly. That I think back. No, exactly. Back to the hike vision thing, or even espionage via the end user license agreement. Exactly. The chain of custody for data is much more important to law enforcement and security than others. And so that's why you see with the explosion of photography drones, people hitting that "yeah, I don't care" button is what I call it. I see that as very serious. I know that one major drone vendor last year at this very expo was accused of such malfeasance, taking data that didn't belong to them and storing it on servers that were offshored. I think that's That's probably the biggest problem this industry faces right now, is the chain of custody of data and being able to trust where it's going and who has it.
But wasn't there an independent report that cleared that?
Yes, as Patrick points out, there was an independent report paid for by the company in question, so I'm not sure how much independence that really brings to the table. More questions about drones and security? Excellent. Well, thank you very much.